So we are reading Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. We are on chapter 23, page number 283 of the book, and page number
58 of the PDF. From a social behavioral viewpoint, as we said, truth is a set of principles by which people live, regardless what they might say they believe. We have seen that there is subjective truth, operational truth, hypothetical truth, intellectual truth, and then there is factual data. The legitimacy of any of these is dependent on the context of a given perceptual level.
So this is very important, this statement over here. The legitimacy of any of these depend on the context of the given perceptual level, right? So truth as it is there will depend on the level of consciousness with which you're operating. So where are you operating from? What is the state of consciousness that you're operating from becomes extremely important in this case also.
Truth is not functional unless it is meaningful, and meaning, like value, is dependent on a unique perceptual field. Facts and data may be convincing at one level and irrelevant at another. Functional validity of information received also varies with the intellectual level and capacity for abstraction of the recipient.
Okay, so the validity of the data being received, again, is very important. Does it really have value for you at that point in time, right? Are we associating it with what level of consciousness are we associating that data? Now, this is something that we got in zero limits also, where it was very clearly said that anything that comes into your awareness, you become responsible for, right? So we have to also understand that even at the levels of consciousness, what is the data that you're allowing into your system becomes very important. So that is again what he's saying over here is whether the data is valid or not for you at that point in time becomes very important. So we must be aware as to what we are associating with. What is the data that we are allowing into our system?
To be operational, truth must not be simply true, but knowable. Yet each level of truth is unknowable to the levels below it and has no validity beyond its own territory. Thus, we can conclude that all levels of truth as we know it, within the dimension of ordinary human function, are examples of dependent truth, whose veracity is totally contingent on a given set of parameters.
So what is right in one situation may be absolutely wrong in another situation. What is right for one person may be absolutely wrong for another person. What is right at a particular point in time may be totally wrong at another point in time. So we need to understand that even the truth can be manipulated depending on our perceptions.
Even a revered scientific truth is also truth by definition of conditions and therefore subject to dispute and error.
So again, when you look at science, science is also continuously evolving. What was the truth 100 years back from a scientific perspective is not the truth right now, again, from a scientific perspective. So science is also evolving. Okay, so the truth as per science is also evolving.
Statistical inference has become a propaganda tool, and the statistical distortions by which anything can be proven about anything have alienated our credence.
So again, when a scientist or a person who's looking for data goes looking for that data, they will perceive what they are looking for. So if a person, and every person is biased in some way or the other, right? So the data that you are going to collect or the data that you're going to perceive will be screened by what you want to perceive. That is why statistical data can be very screened and you cannot believe it every time. For example, I know for a fact I wanted to buy a car, okay? And I was aiming at buying a particular car. Suddenly on the road, I started seeing that brand of the car everywhere where I went. Why? Because I was focusing my attention on that brand of the car. So even when a scientist is doing an experiment, right, and they are wanting to prove something, they will look at it from their perspective as to what they want to prove, and they will not look at something which is disapproving their hypothesis. So again, statistical data becomes a little off.
Is there any impersonal truth, independent of individual condition or context? Truth, as detected by the research methods explicated through this book, derives its validity from ultimate sources far beyond the influence of any localized perceptual field. It respects neither personality nor opinion and does not vary with any condition of subject or environment.
So what he's saying is when you're testing in the kinesiology method, you keep your mind out of it. It will give you whatever the level of consciousness at which the thing is operating, whether it's the truth or it is not the truth. It will be very, very pragmatic about whatever is coming out.
Ignorance does not yield to attack, but it dissipates in the light, and nothing dissolves dishonesty faster than the simple act of revealing the truth. The only way to enhance one's power in the world is by increasing one's integrity, understanding, and opacity for compassion.
So very clearly, right? When something is the truth and it is nothing but the truth, it will stand its ground. It is not going to get moved so easily, right? And also, whenever the truth is there, the untruth or what is, it will light up the environment. And very clearly, he says the only way to increase one's power, that is your attachment with truth, is by being integrous, right? So again, we come back to the four agreements, where the first agreement that was there, the first thing of the four agreements was be impeccable with your word, which indicates total integrity. When you are integrous, you will automatically become compassionate, okay? Because you know where you are taking a stand, and that is it, right? As far as you are concerned.
If the diverse populations of mankind civilization, the survival of human society and the happiness of its members is secure.
So again, as the levels of consciousness of people start to evolve, we start operating more from the right side of the grid. Automatically, evolution will start taking place, because again, all manifestation takes place from the right side of the grid and not from the left side of the grid. Whenever we are not truthful, whenever we are not integrous, we are always on the left side of the grid.
The initial effect of taking responsibility for the truth of one's life is to raise lower energy levels to 200, the critical level at which power first appears, and the stepping stone to all the higher levels. The courage to face the truth leads eventually to acceptance, where greater power arises at the level of 350. Here, there is sufficient energy to solve the majority of man's social problems. This in turn leads to the yet greater power available at 500, the level of love. Knowing our own and everyone else's human foibles gives rise to forgiveness and thence to compassion. Compassion is the doorway to grace and to the final realization of who we are and why we are here, and of the ultimate source of all existence.
So the moment we start engaging the right side of the grid, we will see that the level of consciousness will also start to rise. And one thing will lead to the other. And the more focused we are to creating evolution within us, the more focused we are on being on the right side of the grid, we will see that evolution will automatically take place. There is no question in my mind, at least about this.
A thorough absorption of the material presented herein has been shown to be able to raise one's own level of consciousness by an average of 35 points. Inasmuch as the progression of consciousness during the average of human lifetimes lived on this globe has been only 5 points. Such an increase in individual awareness is an enormous benefit in itself. And as advanced theoretical physics and nonlinear dynamics have shown, any individual increase also raises to some degree the consciousness of everyone on the planet.
So again, what he said previously in the book, that on an average, a normal human being will raise his consciousness level by only 5 points in his whole lifetime. Okay. And what he's saying here, just by reading the book, you will raise your level of consciousness by 35 points. I think the way that we are discussing it, we are talking about it, we are sharing with each other in all the sessions that we are doing, our levels of consciousness will rise much more than 35 points. That's again a view that I have personally. Yes, Mukul Bhavi?
So what we were just discussing before we began the book reading, I think this relates to that a lot. What I said about the anger and all that, which is not there in internal calming, it's just become like this, right? I've not made an effort. So this is what it is. I think what they're talking, like when you're reading, you're listening, you're hearing, and you're just absorbing, and it's affecting your consciousness levels.
Correct. Absolutely.
So it's so beautifully explained.
Yeah. So when we had tested, when we tested last time, when we did the ring test, I'll see today if we finish off, then we'll do the ring test again. And there's a video also showing that very nicely. We had got that most of the people who were there on the session, they were operating at 450.
Wow.
Okay. So that's enormous in the sense that if an average is only 200, they are all operating at 450, nearly nearing 500. It's a huge thing. It's really,
really. Yeah.
To become more conscious is the greatest gift, and in effect, the gift comes back to its source. While the level of consciousness of mankind as a whole stood at a perilous 190 for many centuries, as we have seen in the mid-1980s, it suddenly of 204. For the first time in history, man is now on safe ground from which to continue his upward march. And this promise of new hope comes none too soon. Today, many of the subjects we have discussed are exploding in the news media. The perversion of religion to the end of politics savagery, the deepening activity of crimes, the involvement of children in violence, moral confusion in politics, and the bizarre violence of cults appear against a backdrop colored by the prevalence of lies as social tender and a lack of consensus as to individual and collective responsibility towards one's fellow man.
So basically, most of the news is bad news, right? This is a problem with the media.
This social confusion and paralysis stems from the dearth of guidelines upon which to base decisions. Hopefully, this book has taken a step forward, filling that void with what is, in fact, an essay at a science of morality. By morality, we do not refer to petty moralistic judgments of right and wrong, but to an at once objective and personal basis from which to make decisions and evaluations regarding the highest conduct of our lives.
So, okay, so what action is going to evolve us? What action is going to take us to a higher state of consciousness? Where are we perceiving things from? This can become easily achievable using the processes that we find in the book.
In a social framework, we can certainly choose to refuse passive acquiescence to any political system that falls below the level of 200. Applying to it our newly developed faculties of examination and correction. It is now possible, for instance, to establish clear criteria by which holders of public office should be selected. Each office requires a specific minimum level of awareness in order to be effective. In general, any government official who falls below 200 will not solve problems but create them.
So again, whenever we want to achieve something, that or we want to create something, we want to manifest something, it will manifest at a certain level of consciousness, right? Now, if we are not operating in that level of consciousness while we are attempting to manifest that thing we want to manifest, it is not going to manifest. Okay, over here it clearly says that any of government official or any person who's operating below the level of 200 will normally create problems rather than create solutions, right? So this becomes very important. When we are engaging with people, we have the tools now to be able to judge whether this person will work or it will not work. So we can actually start assessing people in a very, very empirical way, that whether we are putting a square peg in a square hole or a square peg in a round hole. This can become very clear.
The larger social issue is how, in view of the dark side of mankind's behavior, one can maintain compassion. It is a relative world. Everyone acts from his own level of truth and therefore believes that his actions and decisions are right. It is this very rightness that makes fanatics so dangerous.
So again, everyone, whenever they are taking any action, they will always take it from the premise that what they are doing is correct. Okay. But then what is the level of consciousness that they are operating from? And that becomes more important, because nothing is right or wrong. It is always a perspective, right? So the higher the level of consciousness that we operate from, the more it will be beneficial to a greater number of people. If the lower our level of consciousness that we are operating from, that may create problems, because if it is operating from below 200. So where are we operating from? Which is the state of consciousness that we are operating from can really mean a lot. Okay.
But the real danger to society does not come from overt bigotry, such as white supremacism, which calibrates at 150. As such, damage can at least be monitored. The really grave danger to society lies in the silent and invisible entrainment that stealthily conquers the psyche. In the process of entrainment of the public consciousness, negative attractor fields are cosmeticized by rhetoric and manipulation of symbols. Moreover, it is not the overt message of the negative input that destroys consciousness, but the energy field that accompanies it.
So anything to manifest, first, an attractor field has to be created. Now, what is the level of consciousness with which that attractor field is operating really indicates as to what is the effect that it is going to have in society, right? Now, for example, Hitler was one person and he drove the entire population of Germany in a particular direction simply because of this. He was able to manufacture and create an attractor field which literally, and he manipulated the thinking process, the psyche, the the Desh Bhakti of the German people. and he took them into a totally different direction, which many of the actual German people were not ready to accept. But because he was constantly talking about it, constantly saying it, he took them into a totally different track. So when a manipulator starts taking place, you have to become aware of that. And the more people who are operating at a higher level of consciousness, the less this kind of stuff will happen in the world. And at the end of the day, all of us are responsible for what is happening. So we need to raise our level of consciousness so that we can affect more people. Like we read in the last session, that a person operating at 700 can affect, over here it's given over here, a person operating at the level of 700 can affect how many people? Yeah. So 700 can affect 70 million individuals who are operating below the level of 200. So people who are operating at 500 can affect 750,000 individuals. One individual at 400 can affect 4 lakh people, right? So the basic fact that most of us are operating above 400 over here, we are already having an influence on a lot of people, whether we like it or not.
The extreme negativity of many popular works of pseudo-philosophy, for example, is obvious in one tests these books. But even being forewarned cannot defend us against unwitting entrainment by invisible energy fields which activate when these works are read. One may think he can maintain his psychic independence by refuting the work intellectually, but mere exposure to the material has a profound negative effect that continues even after the material is intellectually rejected. It is as though there is within these negative influences a hidden virus whose invasion of our psyche goes unnoticed.
So now what happens? The field has an effect on you. So this is something that we are talking about in the energy field and the Vastu program, where your environment has an effect on you. If you're holding a book, right, the book will have an effect on you. If you're thinking of something, it will have an effect on you. If you're associating with a certain level of people, it will have a effect on you. So everything in our environment is affected, whether we like it or we don't like it. So the most important thing is to maintain our centeredness, our equanimity, so that the stuff which is depleting, which takes us to the left side of the grid, doesn't have an opportunity to enter into our system. So we need to be aware as to what we are associating with, who we are accompanying, what are we watching, what are we reading, what are we seeing, right? We need to do it very intelligently. For example, if you pick up the newspaper, 90% of the news is depleting news. Now, if you're going to read that in first thing in the morning every day, which many people do, what is the state of mind and consciousness that you're putting yourself in, right? And is that information actually important and valid for you or not? Can you do something about it? So if you're not being able to do anything about most of what is given in the newspaper, what is the point of reading it? Whether it's not important to you, right? So we need to figure out ways to get information which is valid for us and which doesn't put us on the left side of the grid. That becomes extremely important.
Additionally, we often relax our circumspection when encountering material, the attributes of spiritual insight or religion, forgetting that every heinous crime of which man is capable has been perpetrated in the name of God. While violent cults may be clearly repellent belief systems that masquerade as piety are far more insidious, for they corrupt by the silent entrainment of invisible attractor fields.
So again, crusades were led in the name of Jesus Christ, right? Jihad is done in the name of Muhammad, right? So all these things, a lot of the crimes that have happened, the witch hunts were done in the name of Christ, right? So there is so much of atrocity which takes place in the name of God, It is actually not funny at all, right? But again, we need to see where we are operating from. We cannot see where anyone else is operating from. We need to see what is the level of consciousness a person is operating from, who we are going to associate. That's why it's very important to always associate with people who are at a higher level than us rather than people who are lower than us. This is what is in the gateway affirmation itself. It is very clearly said that we want to go into these states to experience these expanded states, but we want help and guidance from those who know more or equal to us, not more or less than us, rather not less than us, right? Not people who are operating at a lower state of consciousness than us, always a higher state of consciousness than us. Always tag with someone who's one step ahead of you or 10 steps ahead of you, so that their energy or their attractor field and pattern will pull you towards the level that they are operating at. That is the game that we need to play.
Here, it is best to heed the traditional wisdom that tells us not to fear evil or fight it, but merely avoid it.
So now this becomes very important, right? If we are fighting it, we are associating with it. So it's better to not associate with it, not think about it, just ignore it, right? And the more we focus our attention on where we want to go, and and energy goes where we focus our attention, then that is what will grow in our life. The more we focus on stuff that we don't want in our life, that is what will manifest in our life. So anything that pulls us down, it's better not to pay attention to it. Focus your attention on something which is uplifting.
But in order to avoid it, one has to have the capacity to recognize it. Socrates said, in effect, that without such capacity, youth, including the youth that continues to reside within every adult, is corrupted by lower attractor energy fields.
So now awareness becomes very, very important. The capacity to be able to understand what is good for us, what is raising our level of consciousness, and what is depleting us becomes very, very important, right? So over here in the excursion, we learn the one breath technique, and that can be very helpful to be able to allow us to immediately discern, along with the ring test, that where is this taking us, whether this is good for us or this is not good for us. It's a simple way of understanding and then figuring out what I want to associate with.
Though he was put to death for trying to teach this discernment, his adjuration remains. Obscurity is dispelled by augmenting the light of discernment, not by attacking the darkness.
So again, one diya in a dark room can light up the whole room, right? You can't fight the darkness. You have to bring the light. You have to bring the information. You have to bring the knowledge. You have to bring the understanding to be able to transcend the darkness.
The final issue then is the problem of how we may bear of moral discretion. Our journey of investigation has finally led us to the most critical realization of all. Mankind lacks the capacity to recognize the difference between good and evil. By humbly surrendering to this awareness, man may be forearmed. When we admit we are gullible and easily seduced by the senses and deluded by glamour, including intellectual glamour, we have at least the beginning of discernment.
So again, awareness, right? Awareness and acceptance is the key to be able to shift our states of consciousness.
Fortunately, in this world of duality, man has been given a consciousness which can instantly detect that which is destructive and his ignorant mind by the grossly visible weakening of his body in the presence of the inimical stimuli. Wisdom can ultimately be reduced to the simple process of avoiding that which makes you go weak. Nothing else is really required.
So again, by just figuring out anything that creates stress in your system, and anything that creates stress in your system will make you go weak. So even your breathing, right? If you start paying attention to your breathing, you will find that anything that creates a stress will restrict your breathing, right? Now, anything that creates a stress in your system is not worth it. Drop it like a hot potato. There's no point in indulging in it. Anything that creates stress is automatically putting you on the left side of the grid. And anything that puts you on the left side of the grid is not worth it. Simply drop it, avoid it, get rid of it. Okay. So this is the way that we need to, it allows us, it is, our body system is so sensitive that it can actually detect anything that is not good for you. And the more we start listening to the body system, the better off we will be in discerning what is actually good for our whole and what is not good for our whole, right? What is allowing us to grow and what is actually depleting us and pulling us down.
Through frequent practice of this technique, spiritual blindness to truth and falsehood can be progressively replaced by a growing intuitive vision.
So this is very important, right? And this is something that we find that everyone who attends the excursion workshop, and then of course the gateway and the other programs, the intuitive ability automatically starts to grow. So when you are intuitively present, right, you can, your discernment of what is good for you and not good for you automatically starts to come in. You don't have to do any test. You'll just know. It becomes a sense, right? And you'll steer away from something that is not valuable to you. It simply happens. You don't need to do anything about it. What Mukul Bhabi was saying, it seeps into you. You don't have to do anything. But the point is that you need to engage that those attractor fields which continuously take you to a higher state of consciousness and not bring you down.
Some lucky few seem born with this innate perceptivity. Their lives remain clear and undamaged by negative entrainment. But for most of us, life has not been so easy. We have spent a great deal of it repairing the damage done by destructive attractors, which act like hypnosis. Recovering from a single addiction can take up the majority of a lifetime. And the most common and insidious addiction is to denial, which benights us through our intellectual vanity.
So again, the lower attractor fields are very attractive, right? Because they give sensual pleasure. They'll give you momentary pleasure. So when you are indulging in them, they'll give you the pleasure and you feel, this is it. But then what happens is that that small amount will not work. So you keep increasing the amount to get the same amount of pleasure. And that is what leads to addictions, right? We must be aware of what we are addicted to, what we cannot do, what is attracting us and pulling us down. The moment we start paying attention and we put different fields into play, right? Substitutes, something better, then only we can get out of this kind of fields which are pulling us down all the time. But again, at the end of the day, it is all about becoming aware.
The intellect, contrary to its delusions of grandeur, not only lacks the ability to recognize falsehood, but grossly lacks the necessary power to defend itself, even had it the capacity for discernment.
So this is important, right? Intellectual capacity has its limitation simply because it is not all encompassing. What you know, right? But there is more out there. When we are tapping into the innate intelligence of the human body itself, the body knows, it is hypersensitive, right? So it can transcend the intellectual capacity to discern also, because the body knows what makes it weak and what makes it strong. There is no in between. But the intellect depends on what you know, and that is limited. It's a box. We have to transcend the box in any case.
Is it irreverent in light of history's enormous accretion of works of intellectual speculation to say that man's wanted capacity of reason lacks the critical faculty of discernment? The whole field of philosophy is merely evidence that man has struggled and failed for thousands of years to just recognition of what is true and what is false, or the discourse would long ago have reached some consensus.
So again, so again, what is true and what is false, again, is a matter of perception. So how can we intellectually wrap our head around it? What may be right for one person may be totally wrong for another person. So we can't intellectually discern it. But our body systems know what makes it weak and what makes it strong. So that makes it a very powerful way of discerning what is good for us and what is not good for us.
And it is clear from common human conduct that even if the intellect could reliably arrive at this basic conclusion, it still lacks the power to stop the effect of negative fields.
So intellectually you've understood it, but how do you stop it, right? Again, the way is to raise the level of consciousness that you cannot do intellectually.
We remain unconscious of the causes of our afflictions while the intellect dreams up all kinds of plausible excuses, hypnotized by these same forces. Even when a person intellectually knows his behavior is self destructive, this knowledge has no necessary deterrent effect whatsoever. Intellectual recognition of our addictions has never given us power to control them.
So you cannot transcend an addiction by intellectual reasoning. There has to be a shift in your state of consciousness or the state of consciousness with which you are operating for you to be able to transcend an addiction.
In scripture, we are told that man is afflicted by forces unseen. It is a commonplace of our century that silent, invisible rays of energy are emitted by innocent looking objects. The discoverers of radium paid for this realization with their lives. Roentgen X-rays are lethal and radioactive emissions kill silently, as does radon. The attractor energy fields that destroy us are equally invisible and no less powerful, though far more subtle.
So again, we have these fields with us all the time, right? When you walk into certain places, I have seen as if there is muck on the floor, like inches thick. And as soon as you start walking there, you start getting a tremendous pain in your legs, for example. There are fields which get created which will start making you dull as soon as you enter that zone, right? These fields which are there in spaces also affect us. So these attractor fields, when you're associating with people, when you're associating with spaces, when you're associating with things, what are you watching, what are you reading, all these things start to play a very important play in how you are shifting and what state of being are you operating from.
What is meant is that his consciousness has become dominated by negative attractor fields from which he cannot extricate himself. By this definition, we can see that whole segments of society are so thoroughly possessed that they themselves are totally unconscious of their motives. Wisdom tells us one worships either heaven or hell and will eventually become the servant of one or the other. Hell is not a condition imposed by a judgmental God, but rather the inevitable consequence of one's own decisions. Hell is the final outcome of constantly choosing the negative and thus isolating oneself from love.
So we actually decide what we are wanting to experience in life, and we are experiencing it. So we are responsible. right, for whatever is happening to us. So we need to be aware of what we are creating in our lives and not be possessed by anything that takes us lower, right? So there is no hell, right? Hell is a creation of this world and the C1 consciousness that we live for manipulating people. And also, most people create hell for themselves because of their thinking. If a slight shift in the perspective, in the slight shift in the way that they're looking at things can happen, automatically you can move from heaven to hell, just like that. And I'm seeing this happening over and over again with people. When you change your perspective, the way that you're looking at something, it totally takes you out of the dump into a much more evolving field, or you connect immediately to a higher attractor field, depending on how you shift your perspective. So hell is not created there. There is no hell out there. The hell is right here. And we are the ones who are creating it for ourselves.
Enlightened beings have always described the general populace as being trapped in a dream. The majority of people are driven by unseen forces, and most of us are in despair over this fact a great deal of our lives. We pray to God to relieve us of the burden of our sins, and by confession we look for relief. Remorse seems woven into the fabric of life. How can salvation be possible then for those who have unwittingly become ensnared by such destructive influences?
So again, this is a concept of Maya, right? We are creating this reality. We are the ones responsible for creating it. So most of us are, most of the time, we are always thinking of the past or the future, right? And most of the anxiety comes from the future, and most of the guilt comes from the past. And whenever we are stuck in these two, we are constantly creating a negative field that we are operating in. So over here, the majority of people are driven by unseen forces. And for a great deal of our lives, most of us are in despair over this fact. So when I ask this question to most people, when we explain the grid to them, and I ask this question, okay, where would you rather be? They'll all say we would rather be on the right side. But where are you operating from? They will all say, let me tell you, 99% of the people, if they're not aware of these things, will say we are operating on the left side of the grid, right? So who is creating the hell for us? We are ourselves creating the hell for us because we have it in our power, in our ability to perceive, to shift from the left to the right. It is all a matter of perspective.
Enlightened beings have always described the general populace as being trapped in a dream. The majority of people are driven by unseen forces, and most of us are in despair over this fact a great deal of our lives. I've read this. We pray to God to relieve us of the burden of our sins, and by confession we look for relief. Remorse seems woven into the fabric of life. How can salvation be possible then for those who have unwittingly become ensnared by such destructive influences? In fact, even from a merely scientific viewpoint, salvation is indeed possible. In truth, it is guaranteed by the simple fact that the energy of a loving thought is enormously powerful than that of a negative one. Therefore, the traditional solutions of love and prayer have a sound scientific basis. Man has within his own essence the power of his own salvation.
So, inanimate objects also display this. Like suppose there's a table, right? And I'm lovingly caressing the table and saying, I love you, I care for you. And when we check the energy flow or the energy field of that table with the Lecker antenna, let's say it's operating at 10 feet. The more love we pour into it, the energy field starts to grow. The moment you start, let's say I start mistreating the table and hitting it and saying, I curse you, I don't love you, etc., you'll see the energy field will immediately shrink, right? But which is more powerful, the shrunk energy field or the expanded energy field? The expanded energy field is any day more powerful. So we all have that capacity to love, that capacity to be compassionate, to be that capacity to be giving, to be in forgiveness, to forgive people, right? We have that capacity within us. And those are all connected with the higher levels of consciousness. The moment we start shifting our perspective to these levels of consciousness, automatically we will propel ourselves into those levels of consciousness and get out of the levels of consciousness which are below 200. So again, where do we focus our attention becomes extremely important.
Humanity is an affliction with which we all are burdened. We don't remember asking to be born, and we inherited thence a mind so limited it is hardly capable of distinguishing that which enhances life from that which leads to death. The whole struggle of life is in transcending this myopia. We cannot enter into higher levels of existence until we advance in consciousness to the point where we overcome duality and are no longer earthbound.
So again, duality is what keeps us earthbound, right? When we get into oneness, we cannot remain here. We will transcend. But the idea is that while we are here, our attempt is always to raise our level of consciousness, to become operating at a higher level, to expand our level of perception, the way that we are perceiving things. We want to shift our states of being, right? How are we operating? What are we thinking? What are we doing? That becomes extremely important.
Perhaps our collective will to transcend that we have earned the capacity to finally discover an inborn compass to lead us out of the darkness of ignorance. We needed something very simple, which could bypass those traps of the wily intellect, for which we have paid such an enormous price. This compass merely says yes or no. It tells us that which is aligned with heaven makes us go strong, and that which is aligned with hell makes us go weak.
So over here, he is used hell and heaven, but what I would say, what uplifts us and what depletes us. And we are absolutely capable of actually discerning this by various means, right? One of the means, of course, is the ring test.
The ubiquitous human ego, an I at all. It is merely an it. Seeing.
So this is very important, this statement. The human ego is actually not the I, it is an it. It is attempting, the ego is attempting to control the I, right? Because it wants to protect itself. The moment the I realizes what the ego is, the I will transcend the ego.
Seeing through this illusion reveals an endless cosmic joke in which the human tragedy itself is part of the comedy. The irony of human experience is in how fiercely the ego fights to preserve the illusion of a separate individual I, even though this is not only an ontological impossibility, but the wellspring of all suffering.
So the ego is the actual place from where all suffering arises at the end of the day.
Reason exhausts itself ceaselessly to explain the inexplicable. Explanation itself is high comedy, as preposterous as trying to see the back of one's own head. But the vanity of the ego is boundless, and it becomes even more overblown in this very attempt to make sense of nonsense. The mind, in its identity with the ego, cannot, by definition, comprehend reality. If it could, it would instantly dissolve itself upon recognition of its own illusory nature. It is only beyond the paradox of mind transcending ego that that which is stands forth, self-evident and dazzling in its infinite absoluteness. And then all these words are useless.
So once the I transcends the ego, everything becomes clear, right? Then nothing is hidden. And actually, all of us, we can actually connect with these higher fields. We can raise our level of consciousness to transcend this entire thing. Okay.
But perhaps from compassion for each other's blindness, we can learn to forgive ourselves. Peace can then be our assured future. Our purpose on earth may remain obscure, but the road henceforth is clear. With the consciousness level of humanity, we may expect great transformations throughout human culture as mankind becomes more responsible for its knowledge and thus its deeds. We have become fully accountable, whether we like it or not. We are at the point in the evolution of our collective awareness where we may even assume stewardship of consciousness itself. Humanity is no longer resigned to passively paying the price of ignorance, or its communal consciousness would not have risen to its new level. From this time forth, man may choose to no longer be enslaved by darkness. His destiny can then be certain.
Right. So basically, what he's attempting to say in this is that we have the capacity, we have the power in our hands, in our consciousness, to be able to understand all this and to transcend it. Right. So what he's saying is the capacity to take care. What he says over here, that we may even assume stewardship of consciousness itself. So how do we take stewardship of consciousness? If we can transcend and move into a much higher level of the awareness that we are operating at. Okay, so now what we will do is we'll watch a video which gives us the ring test again. Basically, Appendix B is all about that only. So Shimangla, you can stop your share.
Just one sec. Gloria in Excelsis Due, a possible solution to all of man's problems, absolute freedom, which entails living above earth without boundaries, without fear, with the freedom and love to enjoy the experience in a craft you can call your own, and it won't be known until it's tried.
So basically, again, what she is saying in this paragraph is what we are experiencing when we are going into the higher states of the focus levels, where you can actually understand that you don't need to have your physical body in order to experience these exalted states of experiencing, right? We actually transcend the human body. And basically what the premise of the Monroe Institute is that we are more than our physical bodies. So till we are thinking that we are existing in a physical body, it is very difficult for us to transcend duality. When we want to transcend duality, we have to leave the physical body. And when we go into these higher focus levels, that automatically starts to happen. Okay, anyone wants to share? Shimangla, you can stop the share. Yeah, anyone wants to say anything or share anything? And then we'll watch this video about how to do the ring test again.
You can stop the recording.
Okay, anyone, anything to say or share? Yes,
Can I
Mukul
share
Bhavi?
something?
Yeah, of course.
So last night I was a little uneasy. I couldn't sleep, and I was like, there was a huge
Flutter.
unease. Yeah, a flutter. And suddenly I just thought of my daughter, Priya, and I knew what her day was going to be, the kind of work that she needed to do. And I just sensed that there's trouble, that she's finding it difficult. So immediately, of course, I sent a reball. and I still felt कि नहीं मुझे और कुछ करना है. And अपने आप ही immediately it just came in that I have to do the Ho'oponopono. And I did that, and I must tell you, like within seconds, like within maybe 5 or 6 recitals of the Ho'oponopono, I just calmed down and I knew that things are better with her, and I slept.
Exactly.
So it's just happening. Things are just happening. This is what I want to do.
Yeah, because you're becoming aware of it, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
plus, what has happened over the period of time that we've been doing all this stuff, we have the tools with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why we keep talking about the awareness toolbox, right? You can pick up any tool at any point in time and figure out how it will work for you.
Hmm.
So that becomes extremely important. Number one is becoming aware of what is happening. And number two, to have the capacity to affect it so that we can get clarity.
So what actually astounded me was that I did not have to intellectually think what was the awareness toolbox and what did I need to pick up. It was just coming.
Instinctive.
Yeah. That was very
absolutely good. So that it becomes muscle memory, na?
Yeah.
You'll automatically start doing it.
Yeah.
That's really beautiful. Yes, Rashmi ji, you want to say something? No? Okay. So what we'll do is now we'll watch this video. Okay, there are some advertising and all that in the middle, but don't get affected by it. Take the essence of what is being said in the video.
What do your muscles say about you? In the next few minutes, you're going to learn a fascinating truth about your body, its connection to higher intelligence, and its ability to intuitively know truths from lies, and whether a person, idea, or object is good or bad for it. You'll also learn all about the powerful scientific tool known as the scale of consciousness, and how it can give you an incredibly deep understanding of yourself and the world around you. And most interesting of all, towards the end of this video, you'll get to try out an exercise that helps you feel exactly where you are on this scale. But before we begin, let's first answer the big question. What exactly is the scale of consciousness? The scale of consciousness is a map created by physician and psychiatrist Dr. David R. Hawkins that assigns a numerical value to every human emotion. Enlightenment sits on the very top with a value of 1,000, and shame at the bottom with a value of 20. According to Dr. Hawkins, everything that physically or energetically exists, whether it's a person, an object, an idea, or a belief, vibrates somewhere on this scale. And how high up something is on the scale determines how far it has come in the evolution of humanity, whether it has attained enlightenment, whether it's still stuck in a fearful survival mode, or whether it's somewhere in between. Dr. Hawkins' creation of the scale of consciousness began back in the late 70s, when he started running experiments in the subject of behavioral kinesiology. Behavioral kinesiology hypothesizes that a person's muscles will automatically react in different ways in the presence of good and bad stimuli. According to this theory, a person's muscles will significantly strengthen when exposed to good objects like educational books, good ideas like equality, good emotions like love, and even good people who embody positive traits. On the flip side, a person's muscles would noticeably weaken when exposed to bad objects, ideas, emotions, or people. For example, cigarettes, racism, fear, or con artists. The implications of this theory were fascinating, that we can intuitively tell the positive from the negative, that we are somehow subconsciously linked to a form of higher intelligence, just like how a fish swimming at one edge of a school will instinctively turn when its peer a quarter mile away flees from a predator. Armed with this knowledge, Dr. Hawkins began to dive deeper into this startling human ability and devise a powerful new function for behavioral kinesiology. What if our bodies could also tell us the truth about the objects, people, ideas, and teachings around us? This was the question that helped Dr. Hawkins create what is known as the scale of consciousness. He began by assigning numbers to the entire spectrum of human emotions, with the lowest being 20, the number of shame, and the highest being 1,000, the number of enlightenment. He would then assign a random number to an object, for example, the Bible, and ask his subject whether this number accurately represents the number in question. Marking down their muscles' response through behavioral kinesiology, he would then begin a process of elimination to find the muscle response that best corresponds to the given number. Over the next 20 years, Dr. Hawkins performed thousands of these tests on a variety of subjects. And the result was the scale of consciousness, a remarkable detailed map of the geography of man's experience. Here are some interesting and sometimes controversial examples of the scale of consciousness. Many religions all started off at 1,000, the highest possible level of enlightenment. But today, some of them have dropped to anywhere between 100 plus and 900 plus as a result of misinterpretation. Mother Teresa, Gandhi, and Abraham Lincoln vibrate at 700, which rests at the lower levels of enlightenment. Music from the Beatles vibrates at 520, the level of love. The Constitution of the United States vibrates at 700, while racial supremacy groups vibrate at 150, the level of anger. The United States Marine Corps vibrates at 175, the level of pride. But here's the most staggering revelation of all. As the result of negative programming and energy blockages, 85% of the human population falls below 200, fluctuating between the levels of shame and pride. Which is pretty big news when you combine that with Dr. Hawkins' other connecting theory, that throughout your life, you will attract people, objects, and situations that vibrate at a level similar to you. And so, if your vibrations are stuck below 200, you'll almost always be rejecting good things from coming into your life, like wealth, fulfilling careers, lasting happiness, success, even soulmates. Whereas, if your vibrations are high, say at the level of 500 or above, which is the level of love, every area of your life improves drastically. And this leads us to the next big question. What is the solution to overcoming your energy blockages and raising your vibrations? And is this even possible? That's where Christy Marie Sheldon comes in. Christy is an energetic coach who for the past 15 years has helped over 10,000 people raise their personal vibrations to a level of love or above. Christy claims she can remove the hidden blockages in anyone through a variety of mental and spiritual exercises known as energetic tools. In her upcoming webinar this Thursday, Christy will reveal more about energetic vibrations and the tools used to raise them. She'll even demonstrate one of them live through an immersive guided meditation session that will relax you, remove your energy blockages, and instantly raise your vibrations. At this point, you may be wondering, do Christy's tools really work? And how exactly would your life change if your vibrations were raised? Only one way to find out. So if you haven't already, remember to book your complimentary spot for Christy's webinar. All you need to do is fill in your details in the sign-up box on this page, and your spot will be confirmed. Now, let's move on to the final part of this video, the muscle testing exercise. This exercise is a fun and eye-opening opportunity to rank yourself on the scale of consciousness. You'll experience a basic form of behavioral kinesiology through a simple muscle testing exercise. Please note that we can't guarantee it'll be 100% accurate, but it should give you a rough idea of where you stand before Christy's upcoming webinar. Are you ready? Let's begin.
So when you're muscle testing yourself, the first thing you have to do is calibrate. Then the second thing you do is test. When you calibrate, what you're doing is you're getting a sense of what's true or what's good and what's false or not so good. The way that you do this on yourself, if you don't have a practitioner around like Christy, is you use your fingers by pressing them together in a loop like this. You don't want to press them really hard, but you want to just gently touch the fleshy points of your fingertips together like this. Then what you're going to do is when you have a sense of what's true, this little circuit will stay strong. What I mean is that your fingers will remain together. When something's not true, typically the fingers break or come apart. The way that you do this is you use your other hand in a little loop and create little links like this. And the first way to find out what's true is by saying a statement that's true, like, my name is Kayleen. And then you pull to see if they come apart. If it stays strong, then you know that's true. Then to test what's false or not true, you say something that's not true, like, my name is Sarah. And then when you pull, typically without trying to pull them apart. You want to try to hold them together. Usually they will come apart if you say a statement that's false. Okay? So the way that we use this with Dr. Hawkins' scale, the way that you can test this in your life, is to go to loverabove.com/products, where you can see an example of the scale you saw earlier in this video. This is the scale of vibration where you can test out an area of your life, like your love life or your career or, your health. So what you want to do is pick an area of your life that you're having trouble with right now. Like maybe it's your love life. Create your circuit, calibrate for what's true, and then test out the vibrations. You can start way down at the bottom if you like my relationship is vibrating on the level of shame. Do a test? No. Once you get a sense of where you are on this scale, you can skip to where you kind of guess that you are, like maybe you're at the level of courage in your relationship. So here you would say, my relationship is vibrating at the level of courage. No. So maybe it's higher than that. Is it higher than that? Yes. Great. So you can keep on testing. And you want to keep testing yourself all the way up the scale until you figure out exactly where your vibration is. This will help you when you watch the webinar with Christy.
So, how was the exercise? What did you think of your results? Why don't you write down your results and keep them with you until Christy's webinar on Thursday? That way you'll know exactly which areas of your life you need to focus on when you're participating in the group meditation. And if you think this is something your friends might be interested in, feel free to share this invite with them too. Who knows what might happen when you go through the guided meditation together. See you on Thursday.
So I think this wraps up power versus force. The ring test is, of course, there. You all can use it. And I think, you need to practice a little bit and you need to get it out of your head to get accurate results. Personally speaking, you can really get very accurate results with the ring test. Of course, we have other means, but the ring test is very simple because you don't need any other equipment and you can actually figure it out for yourself. Okay. So before we wrap up, any last comments anyone would like to share or say anything? All good? No one wants to say anything? We read the book for over a month, I think. Or what month? We read it for, I think, 3 months, if I'm not mistaken. So I hope you enjoyed it. And from tomorrow, we are going to start taking up Hands of Light. And then all 3 days, we will be doing Hands of Light.
Stop the recording.
Okay.